How about a little man pants fitting today? I've been working with a few different men in my private Zoom pants fitting class that I offer on my website, and I thought it would be fun to come on and just talk about some of the differences between fitting men and women when you're working on pants. The interesting thing is, when I first thought of this topic, I thought there were going to be a lot of things to talk about, and in actuality, fitting pants for men and women is actually very similar. So what I want to do first is take a look at what a man's pants pattern looks like and what some of the differences are in that pattern. All right, so this is a mini copy of my man jean pattern that I'm working on. It's been sitting on my back burner for a while, and I will get it out there as soon as I finish a few things on my list. But what I want to share with you here is when you're fitting a man's shape, you're really fitting more of a rectangle versus all of the curves that women have. And that can actually end up being an easier situation. But there are a few tricky things that you need to pay attention to get good results. And some of the things are hard to diagnose. Let's look at the seams first. Notice on this pattern, the side seams are relatively straight. Most men don't have a curvy hip along the side seams. The side seams are generally pretty straight, and if you've ever heard of salvage denim jeans and salvage denim jean patterns, those side seams are completely straight so they can take advantage of the cool salvage edges on salvage denim. And the reason why men can get away with having very little curve, again, is because their shape is relatively straight. Now let's look at the front leg. Here is where something tricky can be hiding in the pattern and create fitting problems. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put my ruler so that it is straight with the horizontal guideline at the knee, and I'm going to push it out to the very center front edge, and I'm going to trace that up like this. Now what I want you to notice is, see how there's a slight angle at the center front? It's angling away from center front. Anytime you have a center front edge that's angling away from center front, you're creating a dart in the middle of your pants or jeans. Now, for curvy shapes, specifically if you have a smaller waist than your high hip, that angled center front comes in handy, because what it does is it creates a curve in the waistline, popping up the side seams. When your pants are zipped up, it allows the side seams at the waist to sit at that smaller measurement. If you're a rectangle, and I have lots of experience with that, because really from the waist down, I have a boy legs. I don't have hip curve. I don't have a defined waist. So I have a very similar shape. So I have a lot of experience with this fitting myself. I always straighten out my center front, because if I have that angle, what ends up happening is, because I don't have a defined waist for that waistline to sit on, everything pushes down, and you end up with either like bagginess or poochiness at the base of the fly area, or it can also cause the front leg to pop away from the body and hang weird. So one thing you really want to pay attention to when you're making men's pants or jeans is to have a straight, parallel to the center grain line edge at your center front. And that might also require a little bit of lift on the waistline like that to get a nice 90-degree angle there. So that is one key area that I would pay attention to when you're fitting pants for men. Now, another common thing that people think about is, does the front crotch extension need to be longer? A man might need more room in the front for his shape, but women have a pubic bone, which also could require more room inside. So you don't want to assume you're going to need to extend the front crotch curve until you've tried it on and checked it out. So this is why if you're fitting men's pants, I highly recommend working with the single leg muslin and a separate waistband, and then adding safety seam allowances or fitting allowances to that inseam, because when you're working with a single leg, you can add extra to the inseam, let out the crotch extensions if you need to, and then trim them to a 1/2 inch before you add the second leg. Working with a 2-leg muslin, you can't have a huge seam allowance on the inseam, because when you sew the inseam and crotch together, you end up with a glob of fabric, and it's very hard to tell if things are fitting properly. Instead of assuming that you need an extension, add a fitting allowance there. And the way I would do that is I would come straight out from the crotch and then just measure down, away from the inseam, a similar amount. And I'm just going to dash it in here really quickly just to show you. So this is going to allow you to actually adjust for needing more room if you need it, but if you don't, you're just going to cut it off. So when you sew your first single leg muslin, you're going to sew at the original seam line and then let things out if you need to. Now, if you add it to the front, you also have to add it to the back. And notice I'm going horizontally straight across. I'm not following the line of the crotch curve, because then you'll be changing the length of your inseams. So if you just come straight out and then just fill that in like this, you'll have your extra allowances to let things out if you need to. In terms of fit, one thing men might need to have is more breathing room through the crotch. So that would entail actually cutting the pattern, and I'm just going to cut them both at the same time here because I have them lined up. So if I cut the pattern off here, you could actually just spread this and give yourself a little bit more length right out of the gate. Okay, so that is something you can do. Let me just tape that down. Okay, and then you're going to put the pieces back so they line up. So add whatever you think you need. Put the pieces back like so. And now you've got a longer rise down here. Okay, so we'll just true this up, something like that. Okay, you've dropped the crotch a little bit to give more breathing room between the crotch seam and the body, which can come in handy for men's pants fitting. This is all personal preference. If you want to have a snug pair of jeans, then maybe you don't need to add extra rise, but just know that extra rise can be helpful. Now, I showed you how to add it down here near the crotch curves. If you're fitting pants with extra allowances, you can also, and I'm just going to finish the area above the pocket here because you never want to have air conditioning in your muslin, so you don't want to cut out the front pocket shape, but we can add the same kind of allowances above the waist too, and I'll put those in a different color maybe to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so you can essentially add, above the waistline as well. Just make sure whatever you add here matches. So if you add 3 inches or 2 inches here, make sure you add 3 or 2 inches there. And that will give you the ability to raise and lower the pants. So you can either add it down here before you make your muslin, or just add a fitting allowance. So that's going to give you room to balance the front and back leg when you're working on your single leg muslin. And then of course the final thing I would add would be, add some fitting allowance to your side seam edges. So I've added fitting allowances to the side seams, and as you can see, If there's a slight curve up at the top, just straighten those out, because then you have room to define the waist when you're starting your fitting. You can see here the prep for this pattern for men is almost identical to the prep for the pattern if I were fitting a woman. So the only other thing I want to look at here, and it's kind of out of order, is if your back crotch has a really significant angle to it, that's creating a lot of room on the inside. It's common for men to have more of a flatter behind. So if you've got a very angled center back seam, another thing you can do to remove some of the bagginess that you'll see in the muslin is to straighten that out as well. So I'm going to do that in blue because that's more of a fit adjustment. So I'm just going to straighten this out a little bit like that. Okay, and you can see what that does is all of this area that I've added to the pattern is going to remove some of the fabric from the inside to reduce bagginess. So we filled in the front here to create a situation where you don't get a dart at the center front, and then in the back, if it's got an extreme angle, straighten that out. And here's the beauty of this. If you guessed wrong and straighten this out too much, all you have to do is sew in deeper to bring it back to its original shape. If you have a very angled center back seam and you've already made your muslin, then it becomes more difficult to get rid of that bagginess, because you're going to want to try to pull it out of the side. You're going to look at the bagginess and say to yourself, ooh, I'm going to sew it deeper. Then you're just making the hole even bigger. So I would start out with a straighter center back seam, a straight center front, and add allowances to your inseam. So if you do need a longer crotch extension in the front, you can do it. And then just while we're talking about this extension here in the front, in tailoring there is a term or a fitting technique where you either add room to the left inseam or the right inseam, depending on how you wear your pants. Depending on the style of the pants you're making, if you're making a pair of loose-fitting trousers, you don't need to worry about that at all. You only really need to worry about that if you're making very snug-fitting jeans and you need a little bit more breathing room either on your left or right leg. So if you think that's an issue, work with your single leg muslin on the side that you think you need the room, and then you can take in the other side when you're working on your two leg muslin. So those are the things that I would consider when I'm prepping my pattern to fit a men's pair of pants. After you've prepped your pattern, the process of fitting the pants is exactly the same. So you can follow along with me on my fitting tutorials. If you come up with a fitting issue and you need to, let's say remove excess ease on the back leg, or if you need to remove vertical ease on the back leg, or if the rise is too long or the rise is too short, all of those things are exactly the same if you're fitting men or women. So you can just follow along with all the tutorials I have available here on my channel while you're fitting men's pants. I just wanted to touch upon this because I've gotten some questions about men's pants fitting, and I've been working with a few men to fit pants, and these are some of the things that have come up and the things that you should look for. If you have any questions or comments, please post those below and I will help you. If you're enjoying my content, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel because it helps me grow. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.